Geek out! You wanted the best. You got me instead. That's right. This is it. This is the final episode of Kiss My Podcast. This episode, the last studio album for now. Who knows? It may, like I said, if Kiss ever releases another studio album, this podcast will be dusted off and we'll do this again. But for now, this is it. This is the end of the Kiss My Podcast series. And this is 2012's Monster. It's only 5 years ago. Kiss released Monster. I brought back, Mick one final time. I thought it was best to kind of end the last couple albums with him because he was the guy that really, I got into Kiss, fairly young in 7th or 8th grade, and but he really helped reignite that love of Kiss, like I mentioned before on previous podcasts. So, Mick, thanks for coming back and ending the series here with me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back on.
Yes, sir. So a couple quick things. Gene was in the news recently. A couple people were reaching out to me that he was trying to copyright the Devil Horn sign. And it's funny because I feel like he's been trying to do that since the 80s at least. So I felt like, he's been trying to do that for like 30 years. But I guess today, at the time of recording this, he I guess is officially opted out of that, which is probably for the best. There was no really winning in that on Gene's end, so it's good that that's over for now, hopefully. So just a little quick Kiss news before we started, just because that's kind of been hopping on the internet and whatnot. But just real quick, as we always do, a little info before we dive track by track. This one was released October 9th, 2012, so pretty close to your birthday, Mick. Almost pretty much a week before you would have turned what? 8? How old you would have been? 2012. 23, yeah, 23. So recorded April 13th, 2011 to January 6th, 2012. And this one, the Conway Recording Studios, Hollywood, California, and the Nook Studio City, Los Angeles, California. So again, no New York in this one, but that doesn't really affect it because I won't even bury the lead here. I think this album is pretty darn good. So they definitely go off on a bang on this one, in my opinion here, and it shows. I think they really were excited to get back into it. Produced by Paul Stanley and Greg Collins, who co-produced Sonic Boom as well. We talked to him last episode. Singles: Hello Hallelujah, released July 3rd, 2012, and Long Way Down, released October 23rd, 2012. Some quick album info. According to Gene, they were thinking about recording and working on a follow-up to Sonic Boom since 2010. So, I think it was a pretty quick turnaround here. I got this sense in my little research I did that Paul, and perhaps the rest of the band, but I kind of got it most from Paul from the research I did, that he's kind of more proud of this one and likes it a little bit more than Sonic Boom. I think they were kind of... His big thing was kind of like with Sonic Boom, though. They were like, we want to prove we're still here and we can still do it. And I think they definitely did that. Album art was fine, just kind of a band photo. Gene and Paul kind of in like a headlock thing. On Wikipedia, it said T42 designed the artwork. I don't know, I guess that's the company that did it. But, pretty standard, just the guys on the front cover. I wouldn't say anything iconic. But it's just Kiss is a visual band, so it makes sense to have them on the front cover for it. Anything you have on your end, Mick, before we dive into this album?
Not too much. I mean, I really hadn't even really listened to this album all the way through. I mean, I might have when it came out, but
yeah.
I didn't when it came out. I mean, I had just graduated college and I was doing other things, but I don't even remember really getting too big into this album when it released. And looking back on now, I'm kind of pissed at myself, because at least in my lifetime there hasn't been a ton of Kiss albums that release that I could go out and purchase instantly. So it was nice to actually dive into this one and hear it all the way through again. And so I'm excited to get through and talk about each track.
Yeah, I feel like I was more aware and I listened to more of Sonic Boom when that came out because that was kind of a big deal because Psycho Circus was kind of seen as the end. You know, the
Yeah.
reunion tour and farewell tour was kind of associated with Psycho Circus. So Sonic Boom was kind of like, holy crap, they're back. And then this was like, oh, I guess, you know, they're going to keep going because it only is, you know, 3 years later that they're diving into a new album. But I remember Hello Hallelujah when that came out and liking it. But it's the same kind of thing. I didn't really dive too hardcore into this one, so I'm glad to do it here now. So we'll start right off with Hello Hallelujah. I'm amazed I've been able to pronounce it every time because I'm always stumbling over Hallelujah. I remember one time I just couldn't get it right, and I was just like, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. I just couldn't fucking say it. But anyway, written by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, The Boys, and sung by Paul Stanley. Great opening riff. Just a fucking ass kicker of an opening riff. Definitely, I think it has kind of a Love Gun era feel to it. Paul's vocals on this one sound really, really great, really fresh, really energized. Gene, you can definitely hear Gene's backing vocals in this. Those cut through like a fucking machete, axe, whatever you want to use for Gene. And like, you know, we've said in pretty much every single episode, even the albums we didn't like as much, Kiss loves to destroy on those opening numbers. And this one they definitely do. It makes perfect sense. This is the first single released from the album. Tommy kills it on the solo. This is one of those ones you put in your car, just roll in the windows and turn it up, man. And it's a great opening.
Yeah. I really like the guitar solo in this one. And, you know, kind of like we talked about with Sonic Boom, like, you know, this being the second studio album with you know, Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer on it, like, you know, hearing their, you know, their sound, like, I think, you know, I think we've talked about before, like, I think Tommy Thayer is awesome on guitar for the band, and it was interesting because I was reading, you know, just a little bit about the album, and you know, Gene was talking about how they used like old analog equipment instead of digital stuff, and his quote was, you know, technology is a seductive bitch. She'll seduce you. You press the button, you don't have to do anything, but analog is the love of your life. You can push real hard. It always gives back. For the new album, the actual recording process was 24-track tape, blah, blah, blah. But I just thought, you know, obviously, like you said, with Paul's vocals, like, you know, it's a Kiss song, but it did, you know, just listening to this album again, you know, it felt like you were, you know, you take all the lyrics out, you know, you felt like you were listening to a Kiss album. And, you know, I'm not, you know, a music guru, so, you know, before reading that, I didn't know if they used digital or analog equipment or whatever. But you know, I think too, like the true Kiss Army members out there, you know, I think that's something that they can appreciate about this album if they haven't listened to it already.
Yeah,
is the genuine, you know, sound that you get from it, the Kiss sound, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because that's something where, like, Love Gun era Kiss, they wouldn't have had that. You know, they would have been doing it, you know, through analog. They wouldn't have had, you know, the kind of Pro Tools digital stuff to, you know, copy and paste and fix this really easily. Where something where, you know, that makes you better musicians, because you have to nail the take. You know, you can't fake it. And that's something that, like, you know, I know the Foo Fighters with their album Wasting Light, which I think probably came out around the same time, maybe a couple years later. They were really big, or maybe a couple years earlier. I can't remember. I'm terrible with dates. But anyway, Wasting Light was one where they did the same thing. You know, they recorded it in Dave Grohl's garage, although his garage is like fucking huge. But same kind of thing. They wanted analog, and you can tell, you hear it. Just for rock and roll, just nothing's better than that. And so, yeah, I mean, Gene, of course, sums it up in his very Gene way. But, you know, that totally makes sense, and that's something you can hear on here. You can hear the crunch, you can hear the crispness of their sound, of the vocals, and, you know, just the screams of the guitar and the you know, kind of destruction of the drums is pretty great. And speaking of that, the next song is called Wall of Sound, which is kind of a great way to, I think, describe this album as a whole. This one's, you know, written by Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Tommy Thayer, and sung by Gene. Starts off with a pick slide. You gotta love a pick slide down the guitar. That's like just like the easiest way to like make rock and roll. But like I said, Kiss, their mission statements never really changed. I mean, it's wobbled here and there, and I'd say in the '80s and stuff, and then maybe going a little more grungy. But this one was again just get back to rock and roll, like Paul Stanley's always said, prove they're still here and they can still do it, better than anybody else. Big heavy riffage is always from Gene. I mean, anything associated with Gene, especially if he's singing, it's gonna have the big heavy riffs in there. But the cool thing on this album too, and not just this song, but album in general, is that like they sound like they're in their like 20s again. Like they sound like a young band again. And there are hints of like, even though I say they sound like they're in their 20s, there are hints of like Revenge era Kiss in here. I think kind of the heavy, more metal sound. Like I said, I don't think Kiss is a metal band, but they have metal tendencies in there. A really sleek, sexy guitar solo from Tommy. I mean, like you said, Tommy and Eric. I mean, it's Tommy's second official album with the band. Eric Singer had been there before, but in terms of like this new era, it's the second time that the two of them are with this kind of era of Kiss, and they just work so well because they've it's not like they're brand new members. They've been there for decades at this point,
right.
Especially Eric Singer. I mean, Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer kind of started in Kiss at the same time, but Eric Singer was a official member much sooner, than Tommy Thayer was. But the band's just really on fire, on this track. Wall of Sound.
Yeah, no, one of the things I really liked about this track in particular, and we talked about it on Sonic Boom, and I think on Psycho Circus too. But I've just really, I'm appreciating Gene's vocals more, I guess.
Yeah.
And I really like them on this track in particular. And I just whatever Gene is doing, drinking from the fountain of youth or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think, I'm not going to say I think his vocals have gotten better over time, but I think they haven't gotten worse.
Yeah.
Especially with these albums. I mean, you can argue with some of the other ones maybe, but I think on these, this and Sonic Boom and even Psycho Circus, I think his vocals have come through very clutch for some of these tracks.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think he's also like kind of laid off the cheese a little bit, like he's not doing like as much as I love Domino, where he's just like, I got a man-sized predicament, just like talking and like being kind of ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, that's something you like and you want from Gene as a Kiss fan, but especially these last three albums, he's kind of laid off it a bit, and that was something, when I first started the podcast, over a year ago, I think, which is crazy. I wanted to kind of really touch on how much I think Gene is such a great vocalist in Kiss. Like I always say that like Paul is the voice of Kiss. Like, even though, Gene sings plenty of songs lead, most people I think of, Paul Stanley's kind of, higher kind of rock and roll screams. But, for me, and that's something that's kind of evolved over time, especially with this podcast too, is like Gene for me, I think is the best vocalist in Kiss. And, and this album, proves, like you said, how strong he is. But everyone sounds strong on this. And we hear from every, member of Kiss in this one too as well, which is great. It's always, that's a weapon of theirs, that they have four members that can sing, as much as I love Ace, he's not like the greatest singer, but they all could sing, in the classic era too.
Right.
And throughout, the 80s as well. They had kind of everyone, take a crack at it. Next track though is Freak. You think this one would have been like a Gene Simmons song just because of the title, like it would have been like a very Gene Simmons thing, but it's actually written by Paul Stanley and Tommy Thayer, and sung by Paul Stanley. We get Brian Whelan on piano. The only musician who is not in Kiss that is credited on this album is Brian Whelan, and it's just on this track. One of the things that kind of, it didn't drive me insane, but was like a lot of extra work, was getting all the credit for all the different musicians throughout the like 80s in particular that would play and write and play on the tracks and write on and write the songs that weren't Kiss related. And something that's been really easy with the last two albums is it's pretty much just Kiss. You know what I mean? It's been cool like diving in and talking about some of the other members and musicians and and people who've been associated with Kiss and, their history with the band, but it's just made it a lot easier putting the notes together when it's pretty much just the four members. And all I had to do was, Brian Whelan on piano and Freak. So that was kind of a nice thing on these last two albums in particular. Psycho Circus, as much as I love that was kind of all over the place. Like I said, Peter Criss really isn't playing on it much. Ace is barely playing on it. You get more Tommy than anything else. So that was kind of all over the place. But again, just this song, explosion of guitar, cymbals, and vocals on it. Paul is the lead vocalist on it, but you can definitely hear Gene in the chorus because their voices are very different. Gene's definitely more of the lower register, Paul's the higher register. So I always like when you can hear the two of them at the same time, even though Paul Stanley's the only he's credited just as lead. It's nice to hear Gene in there as well.
Yeah, no, it's funny because a lot of the stuff that I had taken from this song was stuff you had mentioned. How I'd really like the chorus. Kind of when you can hear the other vocals come in, and I'm curious to see what this song would have sounded like if it had been Gene's vocals instead of Paul's, because just looking at the title, you would think it would be, a Gene song to sing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder, how obviously there's a way you decide, obviously who's gonna sing each song or whatnot, but I would definitely be interested to hear what this song would have sounded like if it would have been Gene's vocals instead of Paul's. But yeah. I mean, I think with Paul's vocals, like, this song was fine. It wasn't destroyed because it wasn't Gene. I'm just curious to see what it would have sounded like.
Yeah, I mean, like, the best example of that I always think of is God of Thunder, where you get like the heavy Gene version that's on Destroyer, and then you get like like Paul Stanley, like higher, kind of more. It's not heavy for a song called God of Thunder, which is probably why they went with Gene, obviously, and it becomes his kind of like calling card song. But you definitely would have got like a different sound with it because they do come from totally different kind of styles in terms of how they attack songs. Back to the Stone Age is track 4. This one's cool because it's written by Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Tommy Thayer, and Eric Singer. So you get the whole 4 band members on this one, sung by Mr. Gene Simmons. You get some great screaming from Gene on this one, like really great screams. There's a bit of Psycho Circus in this one. There's just a couple moments that definitely sounded just like the song Psycho Circus. There is like the huge 80s chanting vocals, and you've definitely heard me talk about that in the negative during the 80s, but I don't have a problem with it when I like the song, when I think the song's good, because there's moments where they have the chanting vocals that work, and this is one of them. I always like that Kiss doesn't forget their own history, their own history, so to speak. Really, my biggest notes through this one is just how great Gene's vocals sound on this. I mean, he's a fucking madman on this track. And to paraphrase Gene on this, I definitely like it. He's kind of saying that throughout the track. But yeah, I mean, again, the whole band's on fire, and Gene is just a fucking psycho on this track, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, if you read a little bit about before the album released, and then even even when they said when the release date would be, and Gene kind of talking the album up and everything, and the way he was, like, listening to the album, like, I think about like this track, because I feel like this was like the track he was so into, with his, like you said, his vocals and everything. So I mean, interesting song, but I think Gene was like super into making this song, which typical Gene. So
typical Gene. Back to the Stone Age, such a Gene track title, even though he's not the only writer on it. But Shout Mercy is the next track, written by Paul Stanley, Tommy Thayer, sung by Paul Stanley. Again, I love that this album doesn't have you any time to catch your breath. The riffs just keep coming, just really heavy, in your face, rock and roll. Kiss is still out to destroy. The fact that this is their last album to date so far, and it's one of their most explosive, is just awesome. I mean, they're well at this point when this is released. And when this is released, they're almost 40 years into their career, which is insane that they release an album like this. Also, I like the line, "We're gonna make a little ecstasy, you and me." It's just classic Paul Stanley. But again, just a solid track. I mean, there's no weak tracks on this. But again, I think the thing that I like about this track is just it bridges the gap. They just keep going. They keep rocking. The riffs are huge. Tommy and Eric keep bringing it. And Paul's voice sounds great.
Yeah, definitely a catchy song. I like the chorus in this one. And I'm glad they didn't hit us, with some boring track midway through the album after the first four were pretty interesting. So
yeah, they're not really interested in ballads on this track or on this album, which is cool. There's always a time and a place for the ballad, but they were just like, let's just hit them over the head with it. I mean, the album's called Monster, for Christ's sake. Long Way Down, the next track on the album and the second single released, written by Paul Stanley, Tommy Thayer, sung by Paul Stanley. The opening reminds me a little bit of Led Zeppelin, which is always a good thing. Paul's vocals, actually, like in the beginning, I knew it was Paul singing, but it kind of reminded me of Gene a little bit, which is cool. As much as I've talked about how different they kind of sound, it reminded me of Gene, like the growling a little bit there. And I feel like we don't give Eric Singer enough props. Just some solid work from his drums on this, and throughout the whole album, of course. I mean, he's a fucking beast. If you've ever seen him live or you just watch him, he is just a true professional, and he brings it on this track. I just remember listening to it, feeling like I was like, I need to give him some props on this because he's been with the band for decades and still in the Catman outfit and just rocking and rolling, man.
Yeah. No, I thought this one was a little like less grungy, I guess you could say. Not as heavy as like some of the other tracks on the album. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it was a good choice for the second single to release. And I like the guitar solo in it as well.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's solid stuff. Are you surprised that this is the second single from the album?
Not really. I mean, like, if it were up to me, I probably would have chose another one. And we'll get to the two other songs that I like from this album. But, if they were going for like a difference in kind of, like the taste of like the range of what Kiss is capable of, then this and Hell or Hallelujah, like they were like there was definitely differences between the two. So if that's what they were going for, then yeah, I would have picked this one then.
Yeah. The next track's probably one that I actually might have picked for a single, just because it's kind of a little break in the album and kind of weird. I love the opening to this one, Eat Your Heart Out, this is just Gene. I mean, written by Gene, sung by Gene. A really cool, fun opening with the vocals. And it just shows, Kiss is having fun with this. They're not concerned with, I think, where the music landscape is at this point. Like they're just concerned with making a good Kiss album, which they did. Now when the riffs and the heavy comes in, Gene brings it as always. The chorus is huge. This is probably, I think, the most fun song on the album. I know Hella Hallelujah is like a lot of fun too, but just you get relentless, drumming from Eric, another great solo from Tommy. But this song just seems like a lot of fun that Kiss is having, especially with that opening.
Yeah, no, this was, like I said, there was two other songs there are two other tracks that we hadn't got to that I really liked. This was one of them. This one might be my favorite on the album. But I did think the intro was a little weird at first, just because personally I don't remember like anything like that on like another Kiss track. But the rest of the song I thought was awesome, and it kind of reminded me of like a track from Destroyer, like era. So I thought that was super awesome because Destroyer is one of my favorite if not my favorite album that Kiss released. So.
Yeah. No, anything Destroyer is pretty fucking good. Even Great Expectations with like the weirdest lyrics of all time from old Gene. Next track is The Devil Is Me. Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Tommy Thayer write it and sung by Gene. Of course, you'd expect a super sinister riff from Gene on a track called The Devil Is Me. I like the kind of low vocals that Gene does before the chorus, not necessarily like talking growly vocals, but just kind of low register range vocals. But he also dances around with his vocal range pretty effortlessly on this track. Which I dig a lot.
Yeah, it's like if they needed a track for Gene to spit blood out of his mouth, like this was it.
Yeah.
I like the bass intro. I like the bass throughout. And again, Gene's lyrics were catchy. I mean, it's one of those songs where it's like, okay, it's like you just kind of expect, you expect some, a song like this from, to be sung by Gene and have that bass intro and stuff like that. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that's who Kiss is,
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's a good point about the spitting blood. That would definitely this would be the track you do it on.
Yeah.
Out of This World, it sounds like something Ace would have wrote, but it's actually written by the new spaceman, Tommy Thayer, and sung by Tommy Thayer, so he's the sole credited writer on this one. So it's cool. The next two tracks, with this track and the next track, you get some different vocals, which is nice. So we get Tommy Thayer, like I said, a seasoned vet of the band by this point, of course. I like the great call and response vocals during the chorus, which is nice. Tommy's voice really works well for the band. Like, he doesn't try to sing like Ace. He just sings like Tommy, and I think he's got a pretty stellar voice. You're gonna get anything with the lead guitar player writing it. You're gonna get great, awesome riffage, and you do. And you get I think kind of the best of '80s era Kiss on this track from Tommy, because of course he'd been playing in bands Black and Blue since the '80s.
Yeah, no, I really liked his lyrics on this track, or his vocals, excuse me. But I thought this one was the catchiest song on the album.
Yeah. The call and response vocals I really like a lot in the chorus.
Yeah, definitely.
But the next track we get All for the Love of Rock and Roll. You got to have a track with the actual words rock and roll in it, of course, for Kiss.
Absolutely.
Written by Paul Stanley, excuse me. This one's sung by Eric Singer, though. So we get everyone checked off on the list by this point. Eric Singer rocking the vocals. It's a solid track. I mean, I don't think there's any like bad tracks on the album. This would probably be like, if I had to put my least favorite, I guess this would be it. But Eric has a great voice for the band. There's a bit of Peter Criss in it, and I don't know if that's him doing that because of Peter Criss or if that's just the way his voice naturally sounds. It doesn't, invoke like total Peter Criss memories, but it's hard to not think of him because he is the drummer singing in Kiss. But just a fun rocker. I mean, I definitely could have seen Peter Criss, singing this song, if they would have wrote this back in the classic era.
Yeah. This one, there was, I think it was the beginning of the song, there was a guitar riff and it kind of reminded me of something out of Rock and Roll Over, specifically Mr. Speed.
Yeah.
I think, I like this track. And I think that's probably why, because again, Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over are like my two favorite Kiss albums. Yeah. So
no, again, like, it's not a bad track. It's just, I think it's just a solid track. I do get the Rock and Roll Over thing, which is cool because that's definitely one in my top favorite Kiss albums. Probably my favorite album cover, maybe. Definitely, because I remember buying the freaking cassette of that at Walmart like 20 years ago. But yeah, the cool thing is too is we get to hear from each member of Kiss singing on this one. Take Me Down Below is track 11, written by Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and Tommy Thayer. Cool thing about this one, folks, is we get the dual leads of Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, which is always a treat, dating back to like beginning of Kiss era. I always love when they trade lead vocals. Shout It Out Loud, I think, being probably the biggest example. God Gave Rock and Roll to You, of course, as well, but I think Shout It Out Loud being the one at least I think of for trading vocals. Back to the big riffage. You get some great feedback before the solo by Tommy. It's just a lot of fun. I'm always, like I said, excited to hear Paul and Gene trade vocals back and forth.
Yeah, no, that was my big thing on this track too. Was just the transition between the two, because they just have, when they want to, they can have really distinct voices from each other, and it's like a good combination, between the two. So I like that on this track as well.
Yeah. The last song on the album and the last freaking song we'll talk about on this podcast for now is appropriately called Last Chance. Written by Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Tommy Thayer, sung by the man Paul Stanley. A nice bass intro on this one. I dug that.
Yeah.
That we get from Mr. Gene Simmons. Paul Stanley, I mean, again, champion of vocals. He sounds like a kid again on this one. They all do when it comes down to it. They're just having fun. Huge, wonderful, awesome rock and roll. Great, just sonic noise. I almost said sonic boom, but just like noise that they're making. And I think a fitting closing track for this kind of like raucous, wonderful monster of an album.
Yeah, no. Again, like you said, the bass intro caught my attention. That was my favorite part of this track.
Definitely,
and a good closing to what honestly could have been a disaster of an album.
Yeah, really.
Especially this late in their careers, and with the transition that they've gone through and everything like that. But to come out and I think Gene was saying like they had like 15, and I think it was originally supposed to be like 15 tracks on the album, and then they like cut it down and they switched it a few times, and it ended up being these 12. But to come out and have the album that this one was, I think obviously it says a lot about Kiss and the kind of work they put into their albums. So
I mean, I think that's a good point to like say like this definitely could have been a total disaster, because Sonic Boom was a solid album. If that's how they were going to end it all. I mean, hell, I know Paul wasn't a big fan of Psycho Circus because obviously we didn't have to deal with the behind the scenes stuff. But as I think it's just an album, that would have been a good stopping point too. I mean, I think that would have been a fine way to close it out. But if Monster is the way that Kiss ends their studio album career, obviously they've still been touring since 2002. But if that's the way they end their studio album career, I'm totally fine with it, because it's kind of a perfect name for an album and kind of to sum up their career. Like there's this monster of a band and rock and roll and the visual imagery that they induce, and just the great big sound that they made. I think Monster is a totally fitting way to end it if that's the way they decide to do it.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, my thoughts on Kiss is just, obviously they've had, some turnover with different band members and whatnot. And, Paul and Gene have been the cornerstones for the band, since they started. But I just see, and, this might be me being wishful that, one day I'll be able to go see them play live.
Yeah.
But I just see Kiss being around for, it's like they're the James Bond of like music,
Yeah.
Because it don't, you don't really associate, a specific face with the band. You associate, obviously the makeup to the band and the sound.
Yeah.
And so really, I mean, you can, obviously there's traits from Paul and Gene that you can't replicate, but you could take, great, I mean, look, Tommy Thayer, Eric Singer, like you can take great musicians who have done things in their careers, give them the makeup and, listen to them, play the tracks and get that sound down, and you can just keep Kiss, chugging along. And I mean, I hope that's what happens. Whether it does or not, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I see, like, you got people who have been in the Kiss army since the 70s. Why stop it now? So
yeah, I mean, I don't think Kiss is anywhere near close to stopping. Like you were saying, I mean, I've always heard, Gene talking about the idea of Kiss just continuing on, and it'd be one of those things like, I mean, think of that, like this idea of this band that never stops. And, the visual aspect, like you said, the logos, the makeup is something that continued to go on. And I'm sure some people would hate it, and, they only want classic era Kiss and that's it. But the great thing is, we have that forever. We have the classic era Kiss stuff forever. But this idea of this, brand is almost a bad word, but like that for some people, but that they would just continue on forever and ever and just continue to keep, like that, like I said, the monster being the perfect title. There's this monster rolling on and on.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, it's crazy to think like that's it. I mean, we've talked about, granted, we didn't talk about compilation albums and live albums because that just would have been totally insane. And I wanted to keep it to just kind of like just the original studio release albums. Like I said, if they ever decide to release a new studio album full of original music, we'll be back to do this for sure. But a couple just final thoughts on Kiss and a couple thank yous before we wrap this bad boy up once and for all here. I feel like I've said kind of everything I felt about Kiss throughout, this year plus doing this podcast. I mean, it originally started with just going to be the makeup era. And then, by the start of episode 2, I mean, it really by the end of episode 1 and going into episode 2, I kind of realized, no, we need, this could be a learning experience for me as well, because I'm not a Kiss expert. I love the band, but I didn't really know the makeupless era, and I didn't really know post Psycho Circus that well either. I kind of had my bubble of Kiss that I enjoyed. So this became kind of this great learning experience to talk with my friends about it too, and you, Mick, my brother, and the guy who helped me really get back into Kiss. But at the end of the day, we talked about the good, the bad, the Animalize. I always joke is like probably my least favorite Kiss album. But Kiss really is like, obviously one of my favorite bands of all time. I mean, very few bands for me can claim a higher spot than Kiss. Very few. And I wouldn't have spent over a year talking about, them with you, the listener, and my friends and family, if I didn't love the guys. It's been a total blast dissecting and discussing what makes Kiss Kiss, for the most part. And I have to, obviously thank, my friends and my family, Mick, for coming on the show. Kyle Matthews was my first guest I had on, a friend of mine from my comic shop days, which was great to talk to him. And we kind of always joked that we started off butting heads about comics and stuff, but then we realized, wait, we both enjoy the same things, and we became fast friends from there. And it was great that continued post me working at the comic shop and then just becoming a customer again. Mike Delovich, he was on. I've known him for since like 2003. He's a guy that is like he's like Ace Frehley in the flesh. For me, when I met him, he's just a total beast of a guitar player. An absolute nut. Check out his band, The Nuclears. They're still rocking and rolling. They're just a sonic, I keep saying sonic boom, but they are a total sonic boom of just awesome rock and roll that I met back when I was in my little high school rock and roll band during the Battle of Bands days, playing like Jack's nightclub and all that kind of stuff. Chris Schwartzlander, he tackled music from the Elder, so biggest props to him. And he is not to put him on the spot, but he was the oldest guy I had on, and the reason I say that is because he remembers a lot of the Kiss stuff we might have taken for granted not being there, or not appreciated as much because we weren't there. he remembers when these, a lot of these albums came out. He was there in the thick of it, picking up, he also talked about Creatures of the Night, which is his favorite Kiss album, which is great to hear him, passionately talk about that. And just a great friend and another guy I met through the comic shop. Good old Geek Out Chris, we have two Chris's, but Geek Out Chris, who's been here for every episode we've ever recorded of Geek Out, not just the Kiss podcast. He's got his own Laserdisc show all about laser discs, and his Long Night at Camp Blood Jason podcast, which it was nice to have me on. And so check that out. And again, of course, he's one of the mainstays of the Geek Out podcast and producer extraordinaire. Mr. Sam Stone as well, is on his Beatles podcast and, doing the James Bond podcast. We also did Indiana Jones podcast, and he's going to be one of the main co-hosts coming up with me on this next podcast I'm going to be tackling after Kiss. But he, really endured the 80s as well, which is a big one because it was kind of hard to find people who wanted to talk about 80s Kiss. They were a lot more excited about the makeup era. So, he really stuck it out and hopefully learned a thing or two about 80s Kiss. So I appreciate him coming on talking about that. And like I said, finally, Mick, you were, the one, if it was easier circumstances, I would have loved to have you on as my co-host for every single episode. But just, the way life is and family is and being, a couple states away, it's kind of hard to get it all situated. But I was glad that at least you were able to close out the show with me, which was kind of cool, which is, I wouldn't say a happy accident, but I was originally planning on just ending the last two post Psycho Circus episodes by myself, kind of like how I started the first two episodes by myself. But I was glad to have you along for the ride, sir.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it, and definitely picked up on a lot of things Kiss-wise that I hadn't known previously, and so I really enjoyed being able to do these with you.
Yeah,
so I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And just the final thank you, of course, we cannot end the show without thanking the members of KISS themselves, who gave all of us so much material to discuss, and more importantly, to air guitar to over the years. Because I went fucking nuts listening to Alive and like air guitaring to Let Me Go Rock and Roll like over the weekend. That's just the greatest. Anyway, so thanks, of course. And rest in peace to, unfortunately, these two members, Eric Carr and Mark St. John. Eric Singer, of course, still in the band. Tommy Thayer. Bruce Kulick, guitar player extraordinaire. I would say one of the most well-loved members of KISS. Vinnie Vincent, wherever the hell you are, no matter, with all the shit that went down, you helped, produce some of the best KISS stuff, even though it didn't end well. So thank you wherever the hell you are, Vinnie Vincent. Peter Criss, of course. These last four are the biggest and most important. Peter Criss, Ace Frehley, my favorite member of KISS from ever since I was a little kid. And then really the most important of the most important era, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, because those two have been there since day one. They've worked their asses off. Two of the hardest working guys in rock and roll, and have been kept it going for this long. And to release an album like Monster, basically 40 years later after their debut, is pretty fucking phenomenal. So, to a lot of people, KISS is a brand, a business that is all about how they can make the next buck and what to do and what to put their next logo on. But for me, I think I speak for Mick and everyone's been on the show, to me, they're rock and roll. So, one final time, remember, kids, rock and roll all night and party every day. KISS loves you. Rock and roll.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday. And you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.